Nigeria's oil regulator has rejected Shell's proposed $1.3 billion sale of its onshore oil fields to Renaissance Group because the buyer is not qualified to manage the assets. Now, Shell, which owns the assets via Shell Petroleum Development Company, said it was providing the regulator with all the required information to help facilitate the sales. Shell, on January 16, announced its exit from Nigeria's onshore and shallow water operations after agreeing to sell the business to a consortium of 5 mostly local companies, opting to focus future investments in a potentially more lucrative deep offshore fields. Now, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission declined to approve the sale on the grounds that the Renaissance Consortium could not show it could manage the assets. This morning, Tolu Aderemi, partner Perchstone Graeys Solicitors, joins me to talk more about this. Thank you so much, Tolu Aderemi, for your patience and, of course, joining us.
Thank you, Leko, for having me, and thank you. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. Now, the proposed sale was rejected because the recipient or the Renaissance Group is not qualified, according to NUPRC, enough to manage the assets. Let's understand what the parameters usually are when we talk about, giving approval for a corporate entity to manage an asset in the oil sector.
Thank you very much. When the news broke yesterday, I was a bit concerned. And I was concerned, of course, like every other stakeholder in the sector. I was concerned because the appropriate channels for dissemination of such information, if you recall that on September 16, the NUPRC came out on their website to state that it had not declined and that whatever decision is going to take, it will publish the same. And so when the news broke, it was on Reuters, it was all over the place this day. I went to their website, almost immediately, and there is no such news on their website. But like you, a little bit tells me that the commission, which is the Upstream Commission, might just have taken a view, that the consortium is not qualified to manage those assets, partly because they have claimed that their existing assets have not been very well managed and they were worried whether, they had the capacity. But here is what is important, and I think this is the meat of it. There are 2 levels of approvals. Excuse me. There are 2 levels of approvals. Okay. You will have the technical approval, and of course, you will have the ministerial approval. Now, the ministerial approval is what transfers the interest or the equity, if you like, from the divesting party, to the investing party or to the investor, if you like. And that concept is by the Minister of Petroleum, pursuant to the Petroleum Industry Act. Now, there is a set of guidelines, by the 2021 guidelines and procedure for the issuance or for obtaining ministerial consent. Now, that guideline, there are 2 main provisions there. We go and look at Regulation 5 and Regulation 7. Both of them are categorical about what the commission must consider before advising the minister one way or the other. And really, when you look at it, 3 things. 1 is financial capacity. 2 is technical competence. Okay. And of course, thirdly is that, and I'm paraphrasing now, is that company or the consortium has not been blacklisted, in any shape or form. And so the commission is under an authority or is bound to advise the minister under these particular 2 provisions of the 2021 guidelines. So that's the first step, Leko. The second step is that when this advice is given to the minister, that's the Honorable Minister for Petroleum, to give ministerial consent, there are other parameters that the minister will have to consider, chief of which is the consent of the commission. Remember what happened with Total, that Total divestment. Again, at the commission's level, they had some fitting issues. But at the ministerial level, which was the president's level, it was reviewed, and then there was a consequent grant of it. So I'm not too worried, and I don't want Nigerians to panic or the international community to panic that, look, there are challenges with Nigeria's regulatory system. The commission has only made a representation or advised pursuant to the law of what it believes should be the case. It's now left for the minister to consider that advice or to evaluate that advice and then grant or not grant. As we speak today, and I have not seen any official statement, from the Nigerian government that that assignment or that divestment has been refused.
Okay.
Now,
so I'd like, sorry but there's a part I'd like us to quickly consider. Of course, we've actually shared your thoughts as regards asset acquisition in this like manner. But then I'm concerned about the fact that this Renaissance Group is a consortium of 5 mostly local companies. Now, the issue with domestic firms and their incapacitations in such a large sector is always popping up. And I'm wondering why that is.
Well, the truth of it is some of them are largely political. But again, because of insight, I'm also aware that quite a number, or no, not quite a number, a few of them also live in denial of technical capacity. Financial constraints will not even go into that. But technical capacity, there are quite a few of them that are struggling. Now, what the structure allows for is collaboration. So the commission is not opposed to averse to you collaborating, and which is why, to my mind, I thought the 4 or 5 or 6 of them, which form the consortium, would have pulled their strengths together. Now, and they are well-known companies. And we must constantly continue to encourage domestic exploration and production. But where you have evidence that the assets that is already allocated to you is operating suboptimally. In other words, you're operating less than 50% capacity. It makes no commercial or technical sense to allocate more resources for you. And I give you an example, Leko. If you are aware of what is called the marginal fields, what does a marginal field mean? A marginal field is 50% of an existing field over a period of 10 years. And so what the government does is once you've been allocated a block and you till it or run it for 10 years, government will take 50% of that block, because what it means is that you've not been able to run the other 50% because the first 50% is a bit more productive and commercially, useful to you. And so the regulator has a clear mandate to monitor productivity and efficient production. Don't forget, we have OPEC production quota that we're struggling to meet. And so if the commission does not take that position, and what it also means is that our local, domestic or indigenous companies must also double up their games.
Okay.
Some of us are excited about these divestments from the IOCs because what it does is that it opens up opportunities for the local or the domestic or the indigenous companies. And look at Seplat today. Seplat is doing very well. Look at Sahara. Sahara is doing very well. And so really, those are the sort of infrastructure or the sort of structure that we're looking at to extending to, the likes of Aradel and the other people or the other companies that form this consortium. But
okay.
If you are struggling with existing assets,
yes,
then there's no point living in denial.
Yes. So now that you have talked about the fact that, of course, it's a known truth, it's an open secret that Nigeria is struggling with oil production levels. But then we're talking about that, and yet, ExxonMobil, Italy CNI, Total Energies have all struck deals to sell assets to the country. And we've seen, that come up in recent years. So I'd like to have you tell us, the potential implications of the oil majors retreating from Nigeria's onshore operations for the country's energy sector when we have domestic companies that are not optimally operational.
Oh, yes. So, which is why the regulator is there to, coordinate that particular part of our oil operations in the country. Now, those assets have been duly allocated to the IOCs. And they are also by contract, don't forget. And so if you are signing, and if you look at the Petroleum Act, the entire crude oil in situ is held by government on behalf of the people. So what is done through different arrangements, whether PSCs, whether JVs, and in some cases discretionary allocation. So by those infrastructure, you have been allocated to these oil assets based on certain, understandings. One, that you have the capacity, and two, that you have the financial and technical capacity for the IOCs. Now, you are at liberty as well, because we also want to promote in and out of business operations in the country. So you are at liberty to assign. So terms, or part of the terms of allocating those onshore assets, and let me remind you, those onshore assets we're talking about, Lego, were onshore assets granted to these IOCs in the 1986 award. So at the time, President Obasanjo was trying to encourage the development of our onshore assets. But most of the IOCs were focusing on the offshore basin. And so that was where they wanted to put investment in. And Obasanjo said, look, I will consider it only if you would agree to develop my onshore asset. That was the basis of the 1986 side letters.
But then you understand the fact that offshore assets seem to be more lucrative more than onshore. So that would excusably help us understand why most of these foreign companies in that field would prefer to go offshore.
Well, to be honest with you, offshore assets are more lucrative, but also more expensive to operate. Are you with me? And so it was a presidential directive, and it came by side letter. So I'm not even just telling you out of experience. There are documents that backed it up, and that was the basis of why we had the 1999 Deep Offshore Act. So the side letter was now transited into the Deep Offshore Act with all those provisions, including the Section 4 of the investment tax, which created all the crises with the 1999 PSC. So really, those IOCs were giving these onshore assets, as an incentive for them to invest in. They were giving the offshore assets as an incentive to develop our onshore asset. Now, if many years down the line, you want to now divest, the country is not opposed to you divesting, but we must divest ultimately in the interest of the country. There's no point in divesting. So take, for example, you sit in News Central today, and the management of your company says, look, you know what? We're going to move Lake to another business, and they're bringing somebody who is less competent than you. On all parameters, it doesn't make any sense. So the regulator is there to ensure that whoever is going to be taken, and there are strict regulations. Well, go and look at 2021 guidelines on who is coming, why is the person coming, do they have capacity? And these are companies that are already being regulated anyway by the NUPRC. So they know what their capacity is. What I do not agree with, and I do not believe that may be the case, is that they have refused the advisory on the basis of the environmental issues in the Niger Delta. I think that is going to be completely wrong, unacceptable, and unprofessional. And there is nowhere in the law that allows them to take that kind of decision based on an existing dispute or what have you.
Well, I guess that's why we have regulatory bodies, to actually guide and ensure that contractual terms are agreed to. But then, when we continue to have, shortfalls on the part of the capacity of these local companies, and we're also having issues with these foreign companies wanting to exit because of probably the fact that they're not really, reaping or meeting up to their profit projects. Or revenue projectiles, so to speak. How would that now affect the job creation capacity in the country? You've talked about the oil production, how it would affect that. But then when you look at job creation, people will probably be losing their jobs, and government revenue will also be dwindling. But then doesn't that show that the country is in a dire situation, having to address these two critical areas?
All right. So part of the terms, the commercial terms of divestment of this nature, is that there will be job security. So the existing employees or pool of employees will have to be inherited by the new investor. The challenge you have, which is the point I think you are making, is in twofold. And it is twofold because on the one hand, you have an entity who is interested in letting go. What that means is that the moment I make a board resolution that we now approve that this part of our assets, 30%, must be or should be divested, what it means is that I stop allocating funding for it. And so if it were to be offshore, you're talking about your FPSOs, etc., the divesting party stops putting or allocating money to the fund, including payment of staff. Because really, as far as it's concerned, it's in a transition period. And because it's a transition period is not expected to take any longer than 60 days, otherwise it's deemed to have been, approved. And so it stops allocating funding. The investing party, LECO, will also not be investing or spending money into it. And so your concern about employment now becomes a real issue. But guess what? Even the investment into exploration and production of crude oil is also affected. Because what it means, for the period where we're not approving or where we're not allowing the transition of the assignment, there is a lull of production. There's a lull of investment. No activity is going on. And that is some of the reasons why it becomes difficult for us to meet our OPEC quota obligation. So really, I think and this happened with the Total transaction too. So I think the commission should really and very quickly be assertive. If it is not going to allow the assignment, as it appears to have been published everywhere, it should quickly come out. Remember the last conversation we had, where you asked me whether or not why is Dangote not publishing figures. I remember telling you that Dangote is under an authority of a regulator. And once the regulator has not, so our regulators must learn to live by the laws. They must be assertive and they must be able to speak very quickly. If they come out, imagine what we're discussing today. If the regulator has come out and published on September 16, he said, we will come back to the public on our decision. So if the regulators come out back on their website to say, look, the commission has made this decision, etc., etc. And the reason why it cannot do it is because it is advisory at this stage. The ultimate decision is that of the minister, the Minister of Petroleum, which is the president in this case. Yeah. So I'm a bit concerned that even the commission has to go and review, its mailing architecture, because that decision, must have been leaked one way or the other. As far as I'm concerned, it would have been a temporary decision. It was an advice. The minister is bound or not bound to take the advice, which is the president.
Well, the president is not in the country anyway, and it seems as though the NUPRC is at the center.
They can rule from anywhere. There's no law that says they can rule.
I understand. Well, the NUPRC is at the center of this, and just as you rightly said, that halt or that gap in production, of course, in exploration and production of oil, would continue to exacerbate the issue around improving the numbers when it comes to the overall oil production for the country is a big challenge. So how do we now speed up the process? What do you think should go into ensuring that, all the T's are crossed or the I's are dotted to see that whether or not there's going to be a change in asset acquisition and ownership, this is fast-tracked so that we can begin to see exploration and production go on in that process, because, of course, it's going to be slowing down a lot of things, including revenue.
All right. So you see, traditionally and by law, we have an indigenization policy as a country. And part of that indigenization policy is that when you have companies bidding for certain assets, and you have an indigenous, so let me give you an example. They're bidding for contracts. So indigenous companies are bidding for contracts from the IOCs. Now, when you bid for those contracts, both indigenous companies as well as international companies, the law is that when you bid, if an indigenous company, right, is 10% in terms of quotes higher than the lowest bidder, the normal approach is the lowest bidder wins the bid. But in this case, because of our indigenization process, an indigenous company who bids 10% higher than the lowest bidder must be given by law. In fact, there's a company in Port Harcourt that has taken quite a number of my clients to court over this particular policy that, look, by law, you must allocate that contract to me. And in some of the cases, they won. Of course, on some technical grounds, we went on appeal. Now, that is what the law says, and that protects, for me, that is a protectionism theory. But we must not forget that because under this dispensation, we're looking to attracting additional international or foreign investment into the country, there's a limit to how much the protectionist program must work. And so what government must also do, the Bible, I don't know whether it's the Bible that said it, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so if I am creating a law that allows, that protects you as an indigenous, and it's my duty to look at what's happening in the aviation industry. The minister is doing very well, protecting the indigenous airlines. So if I'm doing that for you, there is also a corresponding obligation for you to develop capacity, for you to also have creative methods of raising finance. Because the country cannot continue to lend to you. And if you want to go into a carry structure, well, you should also be smart and knowledgeable enough to understand how to effectively negotiate a carry agreement. Okay. And so there's a place of indigenous development, and we have examples of that. I've given you to look at Seplat, look at Sahara. Yeah. These are good examples of indigenous companies that are competing and favorably competing with international companies. So it is not the government's responsibility to solely help develop capacity. The indigenous companies must develop capacity by themselves and not spend money frivolously on jets and what.
Well, we hope they'll be able to attract the needed financial capacity to develop themselves, because, of course, we're talking about investments, whether it's going to be on a personal basis or the government will be able to facilitate that. But then a lot of people will be hoping and willing that, when we have indigenous capacity development, it will help the country more in terms of, the CSRs and other benefits that could come to the country, aside having just the foreign companies take over all these things. Do they have more capacity?
Look, without any doubt, you are very right. We must develop indigenous capital to build our GDP. That's the point you are making.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Tolu Aderemi, partner, Perchstone Graeys Solicitors, for your time. Thank you.